Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for being with us at this time of the day, after a long, hot day in the middle of the desert with a little bit of water. Today's speech is about a very hot and challenging topic for us in Kuwait and for every country in the Middle East. Think that without it, no one with us will be here today. Even if we have plenty of of oil, but without a drop of water, nobody can afford to live in such harsh condition. And from that point of view, KFAS put water, energy, health and environment as the four main challenges we are trying to facilitate and tackle with the help of other government and non-government entities within Kuwait as part of our strategic plan. Today's lecture will be given by Ms. Carmen Nonay, Manager, Middle East and North Africa region, Water Global Practice. She will talk about a recent publication of the World Bank regarding beyond scarcity, water security in the Middle East and North Africa, a report being published in 2018. I think the comments and the suggestions that came up with this report should be kept at high level within our decision-making cycle so that we can put the right mitigation and prevention measures. Allow me just to speak a little bit about Ms. Carmen before giving her the floor to give us this briefing or lecture. Ms. Carmen Nonay is an experienced leader in international development with more than 20 years of experience in the World Bank Group, ranging from private sector investment to policy reform or building capacity to help developing countries to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In her current capacity, she managed the World Bank water sector in MENA region, overseeing $3.5 billion portfolio. Prior to that, she was manager for Global Partnership and Resource Mobilization Unit in the Social, Urban, Rural Resilience Global Practice, where she managed more than $2 billion of trust funds, as well as a key partnership with other MDB, such as Global Partnership on Output-Based Aid and the Tokyo Development Learning Center. Carmen has also worked at IFC and MIGA and is familiar with a whole range of World Bank instruments for public and private sectors, infrastructure, financial, and social sectors. Carmen obtained her MBA with honor from Thunderbird School of Global Management and Business Administration and Business on Finance from University of Texas, Houston. Join me to welcome Ms. Carmen and to listen to this extremely important topic and the outcome of her report. Thank you.
Well, being from Spain, I feel a little bit at home with the weather here. So indeed, it's warm, but really lovely. So, al-salam alaikum, ana la atakam Arabi, wal halek ana sauf atakam alan English. So if you permit me. Indeed, today we're going to talk about a report that we put together, and there are I think you're going to get a flash drive with the report already there. This is a little summary. So it is a report that the World Bank put together about the MENA region, the Arab region, titled Beyond Scarcity, Water Security in the Middle East. So I will try to highlight a little bit the report. Again, don't get scared because many of the data is a very worrisome challenge for all of us. But we all need to work together. So the way that the report was done was to look at water security as an assessment of what happens with the water resources. And the conclusion was that in the MENA region, water resources are not managed sustainably. That access has been improving, nevertheless, there are challenges. I was mentioning this morning, if we take the case of Gaza, 90%, 90, of the population doesn't have what we call safe drinking water. And last but not least, water-related risks are growing. And they range from increasing urbanization to climate change. You have experienced it even in the Gulf. We're seeing it in North Africa. So all of this is affecting even more the most water-scarce region in the world, which is the one that we are in. We also know that 60% of our population in the region is under high or very high water stress, while normally is 35% of the population on average around the world. So as someone used to say, it's like having a checking account that you're pulling money out of your ATM and at a speed larger than the money you're depositing. This is what we're doing in the region with water. So let's concentrate for a minute on water resources. So this map will give you an idea of the depletion rates that we have, especially in groundwater in the world. So if you're looking at a region, you see a lot of the red, which means we are depleting at very, very, very high speed. The use is unsustainable. So some are not making the most of the scarce resource. So we're not only having enough, but we're not managing it properly, so we're wasting the limited amount we have. Here you see, sorry. Let me go back. Okay. Here you see at the top Kuwait in terms of the total water productivity. And again, all this data is in the report. So you see the average productivity in middle income countries is the red line. The yellow is the average productivity in high income countries, and this is where Kuwait is. Recycling water is a massive opportunity. And I'm speaking to an audience that you're used to doing much of desal and treating water. But the reality is that what we found doing this analysis is that treated and reused is only 18%. Treated and unused is 25%, and untreated is 57%. So if you add all of that, it means about 80% is not recycled. In this graph, you will see how the diversified water supply contributes to resilience and helps reduce depletion. So it talks about how much is done in desalination, in the reuse of treated wastewater, the reuse of agricultural drainage water, groundwater, etc. So here, the fourth one, that one, is Kuwait. So again, as I mentioned, you are one of the experts and we need to learn from what you're doing in desal, and I'll come later on to it, because of course it comes at a cost. A little bit of reuse of treated wastewater, then is the surface water sustainable, and then the groundwater, which is unsustainable. And here you see how you compare to other countries, not only in the GCC, but also in the whole MENA region. Let's move now beyond the water resource management to the access to the services. How is that improving, but what are the remaining challenges that we have? So in this one, you will see that there is still large disparities between what is the rural area and the urban areas. So, for example, here you will see, Kuwait is over there. And then the world average is here. So the access in urban areas is pretty high in terms of Kuwait. If you compare to others, as I was mentioning in West Bank and Gaza, and that should be even lower, but it's the mix of West Bank with Gaza, is very low. This is what the graph looks like as access to improve sanitation. And here, what you see is that you are at the top after Israel in terms of the sanitation. But you see other countries not too far, like Morocco, that is very, very low. So what we found in the report is that there are large economic losses that are affecting really GDP of the countries from inadequate water supply and sanitation, especially if we look at conflict-affected countries, and we have many of them in the region. And that is why on top you have Libya, Yemen, Iraq, and West Bank and Gaza with the red lines. Kuwait is here. So again, the economic loss is less than in many others. And the one that has the least is Lebanon. In terms of the financial sustainability of water services, we're talking about a region that is, the sector is heavily subsidized. Tariffs are very low. They're not covering O&M. And more important, people are not used to paying for water. Very different than what's happening with the electricity. So again, the service fees are lower than in global averages. And here we're comparing around the world, right? So for example, if you compare on top, you have London, Barcelona, Dubai, and then you keep going down, even places in Saudi Arabia, very, very low. In Egypt, Kuwait City is more towards the half bottom. But quite below, for example, Mexico City or some other countries. So if we move from the access of the sanitation and the water supply, what are the risks that we're seeing in terms of what is affecting the water sector? And what the study tells us, as I mentioned, and we shouldn't be surprised because you're experiencing it, is climate change. I understand a few weeks ago, you have 60 degrees Celsius. Is that correct? Yes? Okay. So in my mind, it's incomprehensible that one will get to 60. But I can tell you, in DC last week, I think we had around 25, which is also unusual. So I think we're all living in a world that we know there is climate change. Places that are hot are getting hotter, that are hot are getting cold, that are cold are getting hot, right? So how do we factor that, of course, into water? We're in the more water scarce region in the world. But I was actually in Jordan a few months ago when they just had big flooding in the city. So again, we might be going from scarcity to flooding, and how do we help our cities, our countries to be resilient and prepare and adapt when that will come? So here you have the water stress level. What it says, this is how it will be moving from 2010 to 2030, which is not many years from now. And how, you have Kuwait there. We always said that Cape Town, and for those of you who were this morning at the workshop that we were doing, we have someone from the Cape Town municipality there, that Kuwait actually could be the next Cape Town of the world, running out of water, right? So you see there up top, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman. And then how, most of the countries that are being driven by climate change, like Saudi Arabia, West Bank, UAE. this one talks about the displacement, and we put here this this map, and again, there is much more data in the book about how displacement migration is really also starting to affect the water stress that we have. And this is very important. We have here the example of Iraq, but we're seeing it in Jordan with a lot of the Syria refugees, and even this morning one of the utilities from Lebanon was talking about how in Lebanon, I think they mentioned 1/3 of the population comes from, in that part where they are Syrian refugees, and that they don't know anymore if their neighbor is Lebanese or Syrian, right? So how do we take into account that displacement that we didn't have some decades ago? And this is affecting, again, the limited water resources that we have. This one is also very interesting and very important in a region. Perhaps when we look at water issues all around the world, I can only think of perhaps, the Eastern European, Central Asia, and Pakistan and India as examples of this. But most of the water that we're using in the region is really what we call transboundary waters. So waters that are being shared by countries, sometimes countries that are in conflict. And this is a very, very challenging area, but as a World Bank, we believe it's an important one to get into, because that's where we can bring our expertise, our convening effect to help out beyond any conflict or political separation. But with this one, you will see how much of, again, the waters are being shared among the different countries that we have in the region. And this one, which perhaps will be one of the most interesting slides for you, we have it for different countries, but I pulled the one on Kuwait. It's a snapshot of the whole analysis that has been done on the project about how Kuwait stands in terms of the three different pillars that I mentioned. So here is the one on water resource management, the first pillar. And basically what you see here in this graph is that the water consumption here in Kuwait is one of the highest ones in the world. You saw it in the prior graphs that we have. As I mentioned, most of it comes from desalination. But again, the trick here is, we shouldn't forget, it's expensive. So it comes as a high cost. Then the rates of the groundwater extraction far exceed the recharge. So how do we think about how do we reuse better the water that we have? And then the plans that Kuwait has are to reuse 100% your wastewater, and that is urgently needed if we really want to ensure that we can be managing properly the water resources. The second pillar was the delivery of the water services. As you saw, in terms of the sanitation and the water access is pretty high here, but most of the groundwater extraction, again, is no charge and is no control, which leads to a lot of waste and non-revenue water. Again, the sector is very, very highly subsidized. So the water prices are one of the lowest, as you saw in the prior graph, in the world, if you were to compare with London, Barcelona, and others. And subsidies also eliminate the financial incentive for efficiency and reduce consumption, forcing investment in supply expansion. So at the end, what we've seen in many countries in the world is that it's a vicious circle. If you heavily subsidize the sector, the tariffs are not covering the O&M, the utilities don't have a financial incentive to really be investing in the operations, then you're getting less quality, less quantity, problems with the water delivery, and because you're not having the financial incentive, you're not operationalizing well, and you have to be putting even more subsidies. So how do you break that vicious circle? Trying to make the utilities creditworthiness, to be really sustained, that they can really go into the market, they can bring the private sector, and that they can reduce then eventually subsidies, and O&M are covering the tariffs. But it's a long way to go from there. Especially, again, we're talking about a region that is the one that most heavily subsidizes water. If you add to that the relationship, especially in the GCC, with electricity and energy and how they go tandem and tandem, especially when we're talking about desal, that complicates more the situation. And we have seen it, for example, in Jordan, how when they increased the tariffs in the energy sector, they actually affected the tariffs and caused more problems into the water sector. Last but not least, the third pillar was about the risk management. The displacement, the climate change were only some of the examples, but we shouldn't forget the urbanization as well, that is taking a token into having more demand for the water. So Kuwait has almost no internal source of fresh water, with most of the groundwater flowing from Saudi Arabia. And the importing water risk poses challenges for food security, and it exposed the country to supply chain disruptions. So what are the take-home messages of the report? What we found out? That water security is about much more than just coping with water scarcity. I think we all need to be improvising and adjusting, because again, some of the risks that we're seeing, they might be evolving as we move forward. Second, the water governance challenges are the common denominator of water insecurity in the region. Again, we need to tackle at the level of reforms, of tariffs, subsidies, very high level, the sectors, in order to ensure that financially we will have utilities that are viable. Third, that strategies that focus only on the supply side solutions have made limited progress towards water security. Global experience shows that technology, policy, and institutional management need to evolve together to achieve water security. And I think that's where the report and the World Bank pulls into some of the expertise of what we're doing in other parts of the world. And I have some of my colleagues here from the Water Global Practice. And we're talking about, again, when I talk about technology here, let's be clear. I mean, you have and you know how to use technology in a much more advanced way than many regions of the world. So don't take me wrong. I think the issue is that the challenge we're facing is so large that we need to think even more beyond. And we're working very close with our colleague in the MENA region in what we call the MENA technology, disrupted technology, to see how we can also bring the youth, because as a matter of fact, this region has the highest percentage of youth compared to any other region of the world. So how do we bring the youth to help us with more innovative technology in the way we're doing irrigation, that we're doing desal and many other things, because it's needed, it's very important. I guess I went ahead of this slide. How can we help, right? And although I always like to ask the audience, well, how do you think we can help you? And then I get interesting answers. But how do we help the World Banks? And let's take it a little bit, this is in general, but then I will zoom in a little bit on the GCCs and Kuwait. So what the World Bank does, and again, we should actually say the World Bank Group, so it's not only the World Bank itself, but the private sector arms such as IFC investing with the private sector, or MEGA providing political risk insurance, is to partner with countries to help to achieve your goals. And we have many SDG goals related to water. And we do that again through the public sector in the bank or the private sector with IFC/MEGA. We also do analytical and advisory work through reimbursable advisory services. And that's mainly here in the GCCs. We don't really lend to the GCCs, but this is a program by which the governments are really hiring the bank. And we pay, we invoice as we're going with the advisory service. So it's very different. We have a big program in Saudi Arabia. We started re-engaging with them last year, and we're working in looking at reforms, also looking at their dams, at a center of expertise that they want to have for the water sector. And we're also working with them, as many of you know, they just took over the secretariat of the G20 which I personally think is a great thing for the Arab world. And they were very keen in seeing water in the G20, which has never been alone. It has always been under agriculture. And they managed to convince the countries to have a communicating water. So I think that's my pledge to the state of Kuwait to get engaged with your colleagues in Saudi Arabia to help out, because I think whatever we all can do with that communique with the G20 will really help everybody, and especially considering the water security we have in the region. We're also looking at potentially doing one with Bahrain, and we've been also in contact to do one with Qatar. And last but not least, these are more the lending activities that we do in other countries that perhaps they will not be so applicable to the GCCs. But as many of you know, we provide loans, we provide grants, guarantees to bring only, not only the private sector, but also public sector, PPPs, co-financing of projects. For example, I was meeting today with the Kuwait Fund, and we're working with them on a project in West Bank and Gaza, which is really a similar structure of co-financing, because they're providing a loan to the PWA, and we're coming from the other side to help, because it's not enough. And I think that's one of the big takeaways. The SDGs are huge, and the goal year is coming soon. So, it's around the corner, and we think we're quite large in the World Bank, or the World Bank Group, but we know we need to work with others. We need to work with people like yourself, your governments, your organizations, because we are all on this if we really want to have an impact. And when we talk about climate change, I go back to people who don't believe so much on climate change. And I say, well, if you don't do it for yourself, at least do it for your future generations, right? Because yes, you had 60 degrees a couple of weeks ago, but probably you don't want your grandkids to have 70 or 80 and not be able to live, right? So with that, I think I will stop there. And then any questions? Again, I might not be able to answer every question. I didn't write the book myself, but I have, again, my colleagues, Joel Kolker and Rajesh Advani from the global practice here. And of course, I don't want to go away without thanking you very much for this opportunity. I was delighted when Ghassan told me that we could come here tonight to present this, because very often we're not able to do these things, and I'm very, very glad to see many of you, and for you to have welcomed us in this really, really nice way to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carmen. And before we open the Q&A session, I'd like to invite Engineer Mohammed Bousheri, Undersecretary of Ministry of Water and Electricity, just to give us some highlights about the current status of water security in Kuwait, as they are in charge of water desalination, and what's their future plans, if you allow me.
Perfect.
Shukran, Doctor. First of all, thanks a lot for World Bank Group water sector, and thanks a lot for Mrs. Carmen for this beneficial presentation. We as MEW, we are responsible for supplying the water for the whole country. We are talking about state of Kuwait, which is, you are talking about more than 4 million people population at the moment. We are able to produce about 630 million imperial gallon per day, and the maximum demand we have reached is 470 million imperial gallon, which is, let's say, it's enough, and we have plenty of water. We can produce more than our demand. On the other hand, our strategic reservoir, I'm talking about the fresh water, we have reached actually 4,000 million imperial gallon, which is available, and this figure considered to be one of the highest in the Middle East. The challenges that we are facing nowadays, it's in two ways. One of them is in the, let's say, production side. The production side, now we are in cooperation with KFAS and KESER and the other related ministries to, let's say, have better efficiency for the water desalination. And the other thing is to try to find some other technologies. And one of them is to use also the, let's say, the clean energy to produce water, such as solar energy. This is one side. The other side is the demand, which is, it's not so easy to control it. Unfortunately, we are talking about a very high rate of consumption per capita in Kuwait. And unfortunately, the main reason beyond this is the tariff. And socially, we cannot increase the tariff because all of you know that the people will not accept to raise the tariff, while the way that they are using the water, sometimes even they are using this fresh water that we have spent a lot of money to get it desalinated, just to wash even the asphalt and the roads. So this is the issue, and hopefully through your implementation and your suggestion to find a solution which is acceptable, either in the production side or in the consumption side. Thank you.
Thank you. I will seize also the opportunity to invite Dr. Mohammed Al-Rashid, Executive Director of the Water Research Center at Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research, to comment a little bit about the R&D future in terms of water, in addition to some comments he has on the lecture.
I would first to thank KFAS for arranging for this excellent presentation and information. Really, enlightening us about the situation in the Gulf and the MENA region as a whole. And I want to thank also the World Bank for their efforts. I just want to tackle the 2 points regarding first the climate change you mentioned. Sometimes the climate change has positive effect, really. We faced in Kuwait in the last November last year rainfall more than we expected, and in fact it enlightened our mind regarding how to manage these extra water resources. As I said in the morning of the opening of the course, that the main problem of our water scarcity in the region is the management. What we need is a more efficient management of our water resources. With this, I don't think that Kuwait will follow Cape Town in the water crisis. That's why I think with good management and the effort of the Ministry of Electricity and Water and all the ministries in the region regarding how to better manage the water resources, and also at the same time we need also to develop our integrated water resource management issues in the region regarding there are many authorities in the countries that are responsible about water. Like for example, in Kuwait here, Ministry of Electricity and Water is responsible for groundwater and desalinated water, while wastewater is under the Ministry of Public Work, and Buffer, which is Public Authority for Agriculture. So the management is distributed among many authorities. If we want to manage our water resources, and this situation is also in the same in all the North region countries. So we need unified, integrated management for the water. I think this is the key issue. The other key issue is the R&D. R&D is very important. We have a challenging situation in the region of water scarcity, and we need innovative solution. Innovative solution will not come without an R&D. We should support an R&D in the region, and at the same time support the application implementation of the results of the R&D. We did many projects, in fact, and we look forward to apply these projects in the region, in Kuwait and other regions that they need this kind of application. So I think what we need in the future, not only to try to conserve and the water, at the same time we need to look for innovative solutions regarding the R&D and supporting the R&D funding, and at the same time implementation of the output of the R&D. I think also at the same time management also has a good part of our future goals and plans to achieve the SDGs in the region and in Kuwait. Thank you at the end, and I hope for maybe a few fruitful course for the next 2 days. Thank you.
إذا في أي أسئلة.
No, I'll follow up on any questions.
Okay, I think we have some room for questions, and you have a mic in the chair, so we start with you gentlemen. Please introduce yourself and from where you are coming.
My name is Tariq Muhti. I'm a former consultant with the Council of Ministers in Kuwait for mega projects. I'm a freelancer now. My question is, I believe that we have to change the mentality of using the water in Kuwait, because the way the water is being used in Kuwait is terrible. The waste is too much, and we can provide a solution that we can collect the rainwater in the roofs of houses. In one of the lectures I delivered, I show a schematic house, sustainable house, and this was one of the solutions. My question, why don't we use nanotechnology to produce fresh water, desalination? Thank you.
Nanotechnology in terms of membranes for desalination of water.
Why don't we use nanotechnology for desalination?
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have, would like to?
هذا كسر.
In fact, water harvesting is a very important issue, as you mentioned. Not only the house, and also in the street, in the region, in the whole area of horizontal areas. This is also issue, very important issue. I think it should be. It's part of the urban management of the water resources. As I mentioned, that the water, the rainfall that we have in November 2018. An example that we can benefit from this extra water rather than becoming a problem in our streets. So you are right, really. And water harvesting, not only the house, in the area and in the region itself is very important. With regard to nanotechnology, we had projects regarding using nano membrane for desalination. In addition to the other kind of membranes like forward osmosis, RO, and other techniques of membrane technology, because desalination has thermal and membrane technologies. So we have many projects that we did already in collaboration with KFAS and with the Ministry of Electricity and Water. And as I said before, that we need to implement these kind of projects. As a R&D institute, we do the pilot project, lab scale project, but we can't do the implementation. It should be with the cooperation of the ministry and other authorities that are responsible for water in Kuwait. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Another question? Please you state your name and to whom you direct your question.
Okay, my name is Ahmad Al-Hamid. I am TBL Senior Specialist in Kuwait Oil Company, leading oil field water management in research and technology group. I have comments more than a question. Okay. In terms of utilize the water in a proper way and manage the water, we have very good experience. KOC is big consumer for the water in terms of the desalination of the crude, desalter, firefighting system, steam generation, and so and so. To minimize the load in MEW, we utilize KMBC effluent treated water, about 3 million imperial gallon per day. We utilize Libya rejected water, about 10 million imperial gallon per day. We utilize also MBW tertiary treated water, about 10 million imperial gallon per day. With the help of KISAR, we able to desalinate the co-produced water. That's mean high salinity water, which exceed 140,000 milligram per liter, and we were able to bring the water up to 40 only, less than 100 milligram per liter for industrial application. I think by sharing this experience with the region, we will minimize and optimize the desalinated water consumption. The total amount of water we utilize it for our day-to-day industrial application is exceeding 25 million imperial gallon. By comparing this with MEW desalination plant, it's significant amount of water. I hope this can be, commercialized and can be shared with the region country to minimize the load in desalinated water.
Thank you very much for this very important comments. And I think as our oil fields get depleted, it produces more water than oil with the aging. And the resources of water we have, although it has high salinity, it's almost double the sea water salinity, and heavily polluted with oil components, but still it could be considered as part or significant part of the solution if we think about sustainable solution of water scarcity in Kuwait. Thank you very much for the comment. Dr. Ma'moon, then we'll come back, Dr.
Ma'moon Halabi, I'm from KISAR. As part of the study, has it been determined what are the technological challenges that needs to be met in order to meet the 2030, I believe, the SDG goals? Have there been an effort by your team or by others that specify in the different three categories that you have indicated, okay, what kind of technological challenges the scientific community has to meet?
I don't know the figure,
Okay.
but I certainly can take a crack at that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think there's two parts to the answer. I'll stay away from the technology for a second, because I think we often look as engineers in this sector, we often look for the engineering solution. We think we can build our way out of this particular problem. And I think what we're finding more and more with water in particular, because of this debate that's been going on for 60 years, whether water is a human right and should be heavily subsidized, or whether water is an economic commodity. In some regions, they're very much arguing that we need to pay the real value for water. So we're often cut in this debate whether we can, caught with this idea whether we can build and increase production, which if we don't address some of the social issues downstream, literally, we end up with a lot of water going through a system but creating very beautiful fountains around the city because we haven't really dealt with our distribution problems. Then there's the demand side, and we've done a great job globally in terms of demand side management on the energy side, but we've done that very, very poorly on the water side, in particular in this region. If you look at the demands per capita and use per capita globally, this region is using massive amount of water compared to other parts of the world. To answer your question specifically around the global issues, there's very different issues that we see in certain parts of the rest of the world. For example, you're blessed with not having an issue around financing, but obviously we have a large portfolio. We have a $42 billion portfolio in the World Bank in water, and we could significantly increase that. We're one of the largest investors in water in emerging markets. But that's a real constraint. We're only currently funding about 20% of the infrastructure needs that we see globally to meet that SDG target. So we've been trying to say this louder and louder while you're doing quite well in the GCC region. Globally, we are not likely to meet. In fact, we can say with very confidently that we're not going to meet the SDG for water because we have not put the resources and we have not reformed how we're doing this. And it's a global standard that we've all committed to. And there are huge challenges in South Asia and in Africa and even in Latin America and parts of East Asia where we simply are not spending the money that we need to close that financing gap. So I haven't addressed your question, I know, in terms specifically in the GCC region, but I hope I've addressed some of it globally and pointed out that it's not just a build exercise, but we also need to look at the demand side as well.
Thank you. Carmen, would you like to comment? That's okay. دكتورة إسراء بعد
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إسراء العيسى. I'm from the Department of Industrial Engineering. I cannot be politically correct on this matter. It's an urgent matter. It's a pressing matter. I think even the next world war would be around water. And we're being very soft on the subject. The people don't want to use reused water or recycled water over here. And I don't know if we have to sign treaties on water sustainability. Even the reused water, which is, in Kuwait we have the highest rate of reused water worldwide, we're using it for agriculture and greening a desert, which is not the proper use. As far as sustainable desalination, I consider myself a researcher in this area, and I don't think there is anything in the horizon such as sustainable desalination. It will never be sustainable. Even using RO is a better option. Even the technologies in nano are not yet developed to provide sustainable water production on a large scale. So I think we need all the support we can get from all worldwide organizations, including the World Bank, on the pressing issue and the need to use recycled water for drinking and to stop consuming the oil, polluting everywhere, and affecting climate change. Even the outlier that we had last November of having heavy rains, it has never been correlated to as a positive result of climate change. This thing has been happening over and over every several years, like Sanat al-Tab'a, for example, or in 2011, I think we had the same surge in increased water, rainwaters. So I do think that the World Bank in particular and all world organizations should really take this matter on the highest level of urgency of signing treaties in this matter. So even the water security numbers that has been published in Kuwait, I don't think, given the demand rate, it will last Kuwait for a month or so, is it? So, and after all these comments, my question to Mr. Bouchahri about the reservoirs of the water security that has been kept, is it like under the ground, and for how many days would it last and satisfy the demand in crisis situations?
Thanks a lot, Dr. Isra. Actually, there is no clear-cut answer for your question. When there is any crisis, name it, I don't know what the nature of this crisis is, but when it comes to use our reservoir, providing that, let's say, zero production, okay? Because we have also in the ministry, we have our own, let's say, plans if there is any interruption for our production system. So let's take the worst scenario, which is zero production. When it comes to zero production, I will not send the water to the network just like normal days. But we have to see, let's say, we will go by priorities according to our plan. So, as you know, now the network, it feeds all the consumers. You have, let's say, residential, You have commercial, you have, let's say, the government utilities, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, there is a main pipeline feeding sometimes all together. So our plans is to minimize the use up till, let's say, we can use it till 3 to 4 months. We can do it, providing that per capita we deliver, let's say, 20 to 50 liters per capita. So this is, as I told you, there is no clear answer for your question, because I don't know what kind of crisis that I'm gonna face. But if we are talking about losing part of our, let's say, production, since we have 8 power stations that they are producing water, then I can manage it. So easy, I can manage it, and the people will not feel it. Let me give you figures. Nowadays, we are using, let's say, we are in the peak now, and we are our consumption, it's almost 470 million imperial gallon, and we can produce more than that far away. We can reach 630. And our reservoir today, we are talking about a capacity of 4,200 million imperial gallon. Today I'm talking about 3,950, let's say 4,000. It is 95 or 96% of our capacity. So we are in a good shape. But I don't know when the crisis will happen, what is the nature of the crisis. But at the end of the day, we have our plans, so I can assure it might reach more than 3 months, providing what with the, let's say, the urgency of use of water, not the way that they are using the water nowadays, or in the normal days.
Thank you, Dr. Mohandes. And is there any comments from other member of panel? I think just to comment on Dr. Asra, I think we have four issues here. We have to ask ourselves, do we have enough water? Do we have the right technology to purify or desalinate water? Do you have the right consumption behavior? And do we have the right investment capital to expand? So I think there are 4 main issues need to be tackled in order to reach near sustainable. There is no such sustainable model for the issue of water worldwide, but at least we try to approach the sustainability model. I can see Dr. Badr shaking his head when you were talking. I thought you have some comments to say in this regard.
Assalamu alaikum. Badr from Kuwait University. I have general comments actually regarding the technologies. The first point, because we're exploring with MIT innovative technologies like the ion concentration polarization, treating the brine coming out of the desalination, which I did not really see in your presentation, because when you talk about desalination, you have to, you're producing potable water and then brine. Brine could be used efficiently to produce more water. It could be used to produce salt, because it deteriorates the coastal line of Kuwait, the coral reefs and stuff like that. It could be discharged in a better way instead of just a channel to reduce its impact on the coastal line and increase the dissolved oxygen. Moving from MSF to RO is a better option. Higher, more efficient and higher recovery, but again, it produces a brine with higher salinity, and this poses more challenge. Now, if we talk about sustainability, I think if we treat the brine and move to a better efficient process, this will definitely reduce the deficit significantly. Now, when we talk about nanotechnologies, we have to keep in mind also the efficiency of this nanotechnology. So it means, keep on doing the R&D and try to improve the efficiency, but we cannot implement it right away until it is efficient when it comes to the recovery and the waste that it produces. So we do have actually a lot of projects tackling such topics with MIT. Now, Engineer Mohammed, I know that in Kuwait we use the water to produce electricity through the turbine, right? So even increasing the consumption of electricity will indirectly affect the consumption of water as well. So I didn't even see that in your presentation, that you need to couple and connect that with the water consumption, because you're talking about only the water consumption is high, but also the electricity, if it's high or not, because more electricity consumption means you need to use the lowest concentrated water through the treatment in ion exchange and getting the electricity. So you need to couple this as well. So this is my general comment. Maybe later on we'll talk about more detailed comments.
Thank you very much. Just to respect the queue, we start with the lady behind, then Dr. Samir, then Dr. Layla.
Thank you. Dr. Dalal Qasim in Department of Architecture, Kuwait University. A quick question. So Kuwait government is now developing Kuwait Master Plan 4, and I was just wondering if World Bank is involved with Perkins and Will in strategies for water. Are they involved in any way or not?
No, we're not.
Yeah, that's an
Short answer.
Yes.
No.
No, we're not.
Thank you for the question. Dr. Samir?
Yeah, I'm Samir Kutub from the Arab Fund. I follow power projects for the Arab Fund. So I look at water desalination from that aspect, which is energy consumption. And since the 80s, we see that any community that faces water shortage, it will run to water desalination. I remember Santa Barbara, when they ran, they even sent experts to Kuwait for that reason. So my question is to many of you, Dr. Mohammed Al-Rashid, His Excellency, the World Bank, what is the minimum energy requirement to desalinate a meter cube now? From research point and from your project portfolio that you have in the World Bank. Minimum energy requirement per meter cube in terms of kilowatt hour.
Probably in terms of dollar will be much easier.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think we have that information. However, I can say, this whole question around desalination being environmentally neutral and how technology is going to come into this is a huge issue. I will cite that we've just recently released a new study in the water practice, a research piece, part of our ongoing work around analysis and knowledge dissemination on desalination. It was done by one of our senior staff, and that's available online. And if you come up later and give us your card, we can make sure you get a copy of that. We have a whole website. We produce quite a bit of analytical and knowledge work. We have a think tank inside the global practice which touches on a number of these issues, and we just so happen, not only the water scarcity report, but we just so happen to have released a study on desalination earlier this year, so we can share that with you.
So again, if we get your contact, we'll be happy to let you know tomorrow. Actually, our expert in desal is here with us in Kuwait, but he couldn't come to this event. He's attending another dinner. So if you give us your contact, we'll give you the numbers. We don't know ourselves out of the top of our head. Sorry.
The question is from a research point of view. How low did they go for water desalination?
In fact, it is a challenging process really, and it's changing with time. I think the figure that I remember now is about $0.8 US for 1 cubic meter. The cost for producing desalination, but this issue is changing. Using ultrafiltration, using forward osmosis, that there is now combined processes regarding using thermal and at the same time using membrane technologies. So the figure might become less than that, but this is as I said, in the pilot project. But you use it in
a larger scale, the figure might come down also. So it's become, that's why now you see desalination spreading over the MENA region, in Egypt and in Morocco. So there is some kind of economic efficiency for using desalination. Even the environmental effects, it can be tackled. The brine that mentioned by Dr. Bedr, it can be managed. You can produce, we have project now to produce minerals economic value of minerals from the brine. At the same time, even the protection will be more efficiency. So there is many practical solutions that can make desalination more friendly to environment and more economic. And there is effort in the GCC countries, in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. There's many research centers that have efforts that needs implementation. That's what I mean. We need from the water authorities in the region to implement these techniques, even in pilot projects. And after that, they will be convinced that this is a real solution environmentally and economically. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. We'll move to Dr. Leila.
Yes, I'm Leila Al-Musawi. I'm a program manager at KFAS. I guess I'm the only economist in this room, ecologist in this room. Sustainable, I guess, for engineers, it's about being able to produce water. And for us, sustainable is to be able to produce water while not impacting the environment and the human health. Right now, we know the Gulf, the salinity has risen 10,000 parts per million in the last decade. Part of it is the change in the drought, the holding of the water from the Euphrates in Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and also all the desalination and power plants we have in the region. The environmental impact is quite large. Sorry, Dr. Mohammed. But honestly, it's not just the heavy metal, it's the brine, it's the thermal impact. There are deserts in these outfalls. And we are really impacting the biodiversity, and probably most of you have heard now the next serious issue is the biodiversity issue.
Thank you, Dr. Leila.
If I might say, I guess the problem in our region, it's a population, it's not an environmental, because you cannot keep bringing people in the desert, not provide them with water. So we have already past the carrying capacity of the environment. This is why we need to produce more and more and more water, because we keep bringing more and more and more people to a desert.
Thank you, Dr. Leila. We have some...
So I assure you we have plenty of ecologists in the World Bank, along with economists. We are about, I sound like an advertisement for our analytical work, but we are releasing a report next month also on water security, which particularly looks at how issues like fertilizer are impacting on water and the health benefits. So we've recently done something on the Human Capital Index, which is really looking at how all of these factors are impacting on our productivity and our health. And for example, we're finding more and more that issues around stunting by not dealing with the waste issue is having an enormous impact. And that's another part of the water cycle that in many parts of the world is not really being addressed. We're very much focused on production, but I agree with you, the sustainability issue is enormous, and not only in terms of the technology, but also the infrastructure itself. We find ourselves investing in plants that we believe are going to have life cycles of 30 years, and we find that due to lack of adequate maintenance, those plants are not lasting the life cycle that was anticipated. And as you know, going in and rebuilding and doing rehab is much more expensive than doing O&M. So those challenges are enormous. We agree.
Thank you. We have room for two more questions. One is here.
You mentioned the role that the World Bank and its affiliates like the IFC and MEGA have on funding projects. I would like to, for you to expand on what kind of projects that you fund in the downstream, which is distribution, carriage, and sale. Have there been any experiences on that side where ecologically responsible private sector initiatives have been funded in other places in the world where you found that there has been positive impact on the demand side?
You want to take that? Yeah, we have quite a few investments on the distribution side. I mean, our largest portfolio is in Africa, and then second largest is in South Asia, where distribution issues are quite extensive. Performance-based contracting for non-revenue water is a huge issue. I mean, just in terms of affordability globally, I work less in this region than others at the table, but I just want to give you a sense of globally where we are. We recently looked at 700 utilities around the globe, and we looked at who had the resources just to finance and maintain the infrastructure that's being built. And out of those, and that was an operating ratio of 1.2. So they were covering all their O&M, and they were able to use some resources for rehabilitation, but had no or very few of them had resources. Only about 15% had resources to take care of capital expenditure, any kind of debt service, which is how most of this infrastructure is funded around the globe. If we simply did 4 things, that figure went from about 15% to nearly 80%. And they sound very easy, and if they were, we wouldn't be in the jam we're in globally. But those 4 things were simply paying 100% payment on tariffs. No tariff increase, just people paying their bills saw an increase from 15 to 30%. So 30% more, 15% more utilities would be able to start taking care of their infrastructure deficit. Then if we looked at reducing energy costs, we spend 10% of the energy costs are used simply to move water around the world, around our systems. So if we could start retrofitting out and moving from diesel pumps to solar pumps, we can make a tremendous impact. So a 10% drop had another 10% increase in the number of utilities who could start going to the market to raise the money they need to close the infrastructure gap and meet the SDG. The big one was non-revenue water, not a surprise. And there has been a huge experience and a big role for the private sector coming in and looking at how to become more efficient. If we were able to drop that figure down to 25% globally, we saw a 25% increase in the number of utilities who would start to be able to use their capital markets to invest in. And then once you put those factors in, if you looked at a 10% tariff increase, that figure of only 15% of the utilities being able to afford infrastructure investment jumped to nearly 80%. So I think we, in this particular thing, particularly around distribution, with demand-side management, not just on the capital expenditure side, but also on the supply side, tended to have a big impact on where to go. And we have a large part, over 50% of our portfolio, that $42 billion portfolio, is in water and sanitation.
Thank you.
If I may also add to this interesting question, I think if we look at the price of water in the Middle East and the North African region as a whole, and this is including the countries as Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, they're the lowest tariffs in the world. Even sub-Saharan Africa is charging higher prices for the water supply than we're charging in the region over here. For every $100 that's going on in terms of cost, I'm talking about just the operating cost, forget about the capital cost. The operating cost of running the water supply systems, the recovery is only $70. So we're getting 70 cents on the dollar. So there's this huge economic, there's a big economic question around this. How will you control the demand if there's not a change in the pricing policies? And there's a lot of investment that goes into producing water in the region because of the scarcity. It's also, as Carmen pointed out in her presentation, the most water scarce region in the world. And all those red hotspots you saw up on the map mean that it's going to cost so much more. And you have the expertise in this country. You have the best expertise in the world in terms of the production of desalinated water. But, the cost of that versus what we're pricing the water at is not, there's no equilibrium in terms of having a high cost of supply and then controlling demand. And that results in a lot of inefficiencies, wastage in the system, across the region. And in this country, you can afford it because you have the energy, you have the oil production, you have the exports, but you could be using the money that's going into wasteful water production, if I may say so, for other things. For other things to invest in your economy, you could be exporting the energy and getting cash income for that. But in some of the other countries that can't afford that, Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, they're in a real fiscal crisis. And tomorrow we'll be talking about this in our presentation, is why is all of this important? It's important because at an economic level, the fiscal debt to GDP ratios are at all-time highs. And how long can we continue financing debt and making the government pay for everything? It's going to cause a fiscal crisis at some point. And you'll see that in terms of crisis, countries around the world have responded with measures that are very harsh. We see that in Australia, when they had severe drought, that's what really kicked in. Strong control on pricing, strong control on water extraction. It's not just the pricing. It's demand management, it's having efficient systems, and it's controlling the extraction. There were times where farmers who had rivers flowing through their land could not extract a single drop of water. And there's obviously very strong enforcement, and it doesn't happen. California had the same thing. Cape Town, South Africa had the same thing. And how have these cities responded in the face of challenge? So I just wanted to add a few words. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, one more study that's coming out. I know I sound like a billboard for the bank, but they're all free to download. Everything we do is public access and open access. At Stockholm Water Week in August, we're releasing a major study on subsidies. And a lot of the points that Rajesh raised come out of that study. We are not using the subsidies effectively. They're going to the wealthy. They're going to those people who don't tend to need it, and we're not doing it in the most effective way. We're in no way saying public money should not go into the water sector, just the opposite. We are suggesting that it be done more effectively. And if there is a public policy decision to subsidize tariffs, there are ways that can be done on the demand side to bring that down. Simply transparency. We've seen systems where water bills were given out with what the real tariff rate would be to everybody. And then just publicly showing what the subsidy is has had an impact on the demand of water. When you get your bill and you see that you could be paying $200 a month, the equivalent of, for water, but due to the tariff you're paying $20, $25, that has had an impact on the demand. So there are a number of soft things that can be done. We've seen public advertising having a dramatic impact on water use, and these public information campaigns can be very, very positively influencing water demand as well. So another study coming.
Thank you. Very interesting comment. We have last question and last question. We have to close. So we start with the خلينا نشوف إذا السؤال سريع ممكن بس نبدأ من الخلف.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الدكتور عبد الرحمن مطيري from College of Technological Studies. I have one question to Engineer Mohammed Boucheri regarding to the MSF technologies. Most countries in the region today, they try to stop MSF technologies due to low economic efficiency. I mean here high production cost compared to the other desalination technologies. For example, now we have in Oman, Aquapower phased out 2 MSF plant last year due to high production cost. The question here to Engineer Boucheri, is the ministry have any plan to stop MSF technologies for the future project or enhance or replace the existing MSF plant with more efficient technology like MED or reverse osmosis? Thank you.
Shukran, Dr. Abdurrahman. Yes, I agree with you. Now we are after the new projects with the new technologies, which is much less, let's say, cost effective when you produce the water. The last, let's say, 3 projects, we went with the RO and the MED, which is in Azure North, and also the new coming projects for Azure North phase 2 and 3, and also for Al Khiran. I agree with you.
Thank you.
Mohammed Ramadan, KFAS. I don't know if you explored the option of importing and exporting water. The reason I'm saying that because there was actually an idea by a private local company of using the VLCC, the crude tankers, okay, when they ship the oil, they come back with water from areas that are rich in water to areas which are poor water. So is this an option?
So it just turns out that my first meeting that I came back from my overseas assignment in Washington was on this. There was a delegation from Kuwait who came to the World Bank and made this proposal. There was some investigation that was made up, but the energy costs associated with this were prohibitive. So there's a number of technologies being looked at, but transboundary water, on the other hand, more efficiency around transboundary has proven to have a very positive impact. But in terms of these empty tankers that are positioned around the world, picking up water and bringing it around, the costs associated with that transport is very, very high.
Thank you.
If I just may add one question, response to that. This morning at our training, we had somebody from Algeria, and she was talking about some years back, there was extreme drought in Algeria. And as you know, Algeria is a very large energy producer. And they were considering, they had come to the point of sending oil to Europe and coming back with fresh tankers full of water, tankers full of fresh water back to Algeria. And she said, we had just financially planned this because it was so expensive to do, but the country did not have a choice. We had run out of resources, the rains had completely failed, the droughts had taken its toll on the country. And she said that that year it rained. It rained, and we had the rain, and the problem went away, but we were almost at the point of having to bring in water from the European continent into Algeria. So it's a very interesting question.
Thank you very much. Before taking the last question, I just want we have, if you have a barcode scanner, please have your barcode scanner to fill our survey, just to get your feedback. It is very important for us. And also, an Arabic and English copy of the report is available also on their website, as well as on the flash memory provided in the back seat. Then we take the last question.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. دكتورة خولة شايجي, College of Engineering, Kuwait University, Chemical Engineering Department, an ex-employee of Ministry of Electricity and Water. I try to keep myself quiet and not to say anything for the last, since you started the discussion, and this is not me, but I couldn't in the last minute.
I can notice that.
I have lots of things to say, believe me, and Dr. Mohammed, Mohandes Bouchehri know me very well. We have many issues. We need to take it seriously here. Starting from, as you mentioned, the consumption, the technology, the demand, all of this. Talking about the demand, the production and demand, we're doing fine, but this is based on, or depends on fuel consumption, environmental pollution, and cost for the country. Okay, it's true that we have recently, in the last 2 years, the production higher than the demand, but still we're like, paying for this from the natural resources and the pollution to the air and the sea. Talking about changing the technology, Kuwait depends, you can say, 80% on MSF. And the RO recently applied in Kuwait with a big failure story, to say this, in Shuwaykh RO plants because of bad location selection and due to many technical and problems in another RO plants in Azor or in Shuwaykh. The success and evaluation of RO plant in Kuwait is the evaluation of using RO in Kuwait. We have a really bad experience with that. Correct me, Engineer Bouchehri, if I'm wrong, compared to the MSF technology. And if we go to the climate change effect, I totally disagree with Dr. Rashid. Just check the effect of seawater temperature on the operation of the 7 MSF plants and how it's highly affecting the operation. I'm talking to you from operation point of view, which will end up affecting the fuel consumption and the cost, not just the water availability and the production of the plants. I'm talking about maintenance of the plants that cost the MEW millions of dollars of KDs a year. And when you talk about the desalination sustainability, it's on paper only. Nothing is coming in the near future. I don't see anything or any serious action regarding this. And talking about the changing the technology from thermal to non-thermal, I don't see this either showing in the near future. If Kuwait planning to go for changing the technology, they would do this 30 years ago when they started the RO as a trial in Doha. They just start applying this after like most of the countries applied RO except of Kuwait. By the time other countries start using another technology, Kuwait started the RO recently. What happened, can I ask regarding the research? Kuwait spent lots of money on research through KFAS, through Kuwait University, MEW. Can you tell me how many of the research done, proved successfully, applied in Kuwait? Nothing. Or you can say 1% out of many projects. We're spending lots of money on research and projects, but for application purpose. I want to apply and see these projects, applied, but nothing is applied. So don't tell me about sustainability. I don't see this coming in the near future. Sorry to say this.
Thank you, Dr. Khawla. If you ask this question at the beginning of the Q&A, it will consume the whole Q&A period. I'm not sure if there is a room for reply or any response.
Just a quick answer. Thank you, shukran, Dr. Khawla. I appreciate what Khawla said, but also to be frank, nowadays most of our projects, we are delivering all the projects through the private sector. And when it comes to the private sector, it comes to the competition. When it goes to the competition, they go for the best solutions and the most economical one, providing that they will equip with our specs. As I told you, Azure North, we went with the MED, and also I believe phase 2 and phase 3 will go the same. This is part of the answer to your question, while regarding Al Shweikh and using an RO and having bad results, frankly talking, Khawla, I don't have results, or I have figures that showing that it is not succeeded. Let me see it then. Let me see it then. But that's all what can I say. But at the end of the day, we are responsible to supply the country with a water that we are confident it is complying with the WHO, let's say, specification. And we do our best to get this service available 24 hours with high quality. This is our responsibility. Thank you.
And I agree with most of what you said, Dr. Khawla, regarding R&D implementation. I said that already, that we need implementation of the R&D. We have many projects that not has been implemented yet, not only in Kuwait, in the region. It's a general problem. Regarding that, we are spending a lot of money on research. I don't agree with you, really. Even the figures don't agree with you. We need more support for funding for the research in Kuwait and the region itself. But we need implementation. Regarding the climate change, I took the positive part. I know that there is negative parts of the climate change, but the positive part is more rainfall is good for our country, but we have to know how to manage it, harvesting the water in the level of the house, in the area, and in the country as a whole. Regarding desalination sustainability, yes, I agree that with the current situation, there is no sustainability. That's what we are aim for in our research, to reduce the effect on the sea, as I mentioned, and also in the brine itself. It can be a benefit rather than a problem. That's why implementation is the key issue for solving our problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, and thank you all for being patient with us to the last minute, which means that the topic is important, the speakers and the interaction. It really makes this 1.5 hour very rich of discussions and ideas. Thank you very much again, and we look forward to see you again in another event. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Just record for our meeting.